On this Tuesday night, Hurricane Fiona's ferocity, the devastation and despair in the Caribbean.
But the important thing is that we're alive.
With the storm set to lash Atlantic Canada when it could hit. The Prime Minister's first UN General Assembly in 4 years. The organization's ominous warning. A taste of inflation. How pressure on pocketbooks is changing the way Canadians shop for food. And the worldwide outcry after a woman.
This could be me. This could be my daughter.
Dies in the custody of Iran's morality police.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Ottawa is getting set to drop the mandatory vaccination requirements for international travel, making the ArriveCan app optional. The change is slated to take effect by the end of this month, according to a senior government source who says the proposal still needs to be finalized by the Prime Minister before it can be officially announced. This comes after months of complaints from members of the travel and tourism industries who've said the rules have impeded business. Atlantic Canada is bracing for a hit from a powerful and deadly storm. Hurricane Fiona is ripping through the Caribbean with its sights set on the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It's forecast to hit Saturday as a downgraded post-tropical storm. Fiona has already caused widespread damage in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. And as Jackson Proskow reports, it's the island nation of Turks and Caicos now bearing the brunt.
Fiona lashed Turks and Caicos as a major Category 3 storm after skirting the Dominican Republic, downing trees, flooding roads, and upending lives. It is a disaster, says this man. We lost everything here, and everything got wet. I am ruined. The U.S. territory of Puerto Rico took the brunt of the damage. Fiona moved across the island at a slow crawl, dropping nearly a meter of rain in some places. The island's fragile power grid collapsed, plunging all 3.2 million residents into darkness before the storm even made landfall. Most homes are still without clean running water. It could take days to restore. We're looking for gasoline, water, ice, all the supplies necessary for getting through this. Puerto Rico is still struggling to recover exactly 5 years after Hurricane Maria devastated the island, leaving an estimated 3,000 dead. When Fiona hit, thousands of homes were still covered in blue tarps.
They just went through Maria. And now again. But the important thing is that we're alive.
Officials insist lessons were learned and the island was better prepared.
We have 10 times the meals and water. We also have 3 times the generator support that we had prior to Hurricane Maria.
The worry is what comes next. After a quiet start to hurricane season, the Atlantic has awoken, with conditions ripe for storms that rapidly intensify and maintain their strength as they track north.
It's important for us to start thinking about, as a society, how can we better prepare our coastlines for these changing storms, for storms that are becoming stronger and for storms that are raining more.
Fiona's path puts it on course to intensify as it moves toward Bermuda, before taking direct aim at Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador later this week, where there's potential for more catastrophic damage. Jackson Proskow, Global News.
In Japan, at least 4 people are dead from Typhoon Nanmadol, one of the worst storms to hit the country. Nanmadol triggered record rainfall, mudslides, and wind gusts topping 230 kilometers per hour. 114 people are injured. The huge storm has now been downgraded to a cyclone, but roughly 140,000 homes are still without electricity. And in Alaska, the government is assessing the damage after an intense storm pounded a remote area in the west. Severe flooding knocked out power and sent residents fleeing. The surf was so strong it tore some homes off of their foundations. The storm, triggered by remnants of Typhoon Merbok, is also influencing weather patterns as far away as California. The House of Commons resumed sitting today with a new leader fronting the opposition. Pierre Poilievre did not get to face off with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who's at the United Nations General Assembly. But the Conservative leader pushed the Liberal government on tax cuts and affordability. Our chief political correspondent David Akin joins us now. And as the new session gets underway, David, affordability is also top of mind for the federal government.
Well, Nitu, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau last week promised the first order of business this week would be inflation relief. And his government was true to its word, tabling 2 new pieces of legislation as soon as proceedings got underway.
This is what an economy that works for all Canadians looks like. This is the targeted support Canadians have been asking for.
The 2 bills do 3 things. First, the government proposes a temporary doubling of the GST rebate. That could put an extra $234 in the pockets of 11 million Canadians. Payments will be automatic. Second, those eligible for the Canada Housing Benefit can apply for a one-time top-up of $500. That's expected to help 1.8 million Canadians. Ottawa is also proposing a new dental benefit for kids under 12 in low-income households without a dental plan. It would be a first step towards universal national dental care. This benefit could help as many as 500,000 kids get up to $1,300. But to get it, you'll need to apply with receipts. When these bills come to a vote, the NDP is expected to support the Liberals.
It is on us, it's on government to step up and give you the respect and the dignity of being able to buy your groceries, pay your bills, and be able to support your family.
But a former Conservative leader says the government is on the wrong track.
The new measures proposed by the government will just get vaporized by continued sustained inflation.
And the new Conservative leader urged the government to cancel proposed increases to the carbon tax and to EI and CPP premiums.
Will the government cancel these tax hikes so that Canadians can afford to eat, heat, and house themselves?
So there's going to be a political fight over this, which means it could be weeks and possibly months before these bills become law, letting low-income Canadians access this temporary financial relief. Neetu.
David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. After a summer of runaway inflation, the increasing stress on Canadian families' budgets is starting to ease slightly. According to Statistics Canada, the inflation rate cooled slightly to 7% in August, down from a high of 8.1% earlier this summer. The biggest driver was the big drop in gas prices, down 9.6%. But as Gaviola reports, Canadians are still going to be paying more at the supermarket.
Even with a break at the pumps, sticker shock at the grocery store is putting the squeeze on household budgets.
People are on a tight budget. Interest rates are going up. So you have less income to dedicate to food no matter what.
In the past year, inflation has forced 3/4 of us to change our food habits. 40% focused on wasting less, 1 in 5 buying cheaper generic label brands, about 20% purchasing discounted food that's about to expire.
They're looking at loyalty programs, they're looking at coupons, they're looking at weekly flyers, apps to reduce waste.
One particularly alarming stat, nearly 1 in 4 are buying less food. 30% of women say that's how they're coping.
And that's really, I think, a dangerous threshold. So it means that people are changing their diets, they're making dietary compromises.
Getting a handle on inflation during normal times can be challenging, but more so during this pandemic, with so many global inflationary pressures, war in Ukraine, supply chain snarls, COVID measures, and a stronger US dollar, which makes it more expensive for us to import. That's why the central bank looks at core inflation, stripping out the noise to get a better handle on the cost of living.
The Bank of Canada has become a bit more sophisticated, and it has various ways of trying to strip out the extreme volatility.
The jury's still out on how well core inflation captures this latest onslaught of sticker shock. The cost of living may be taking a step in the right direction, but it likely still needs a monetary policy push.
We're looking for another 50 basis point increase because, again, inflation is still well above target. The bank still wants to corral that a little bit more.
There's more data coming on jobs, plus another inflation snapshot ahead of the central bank's next interest rate announcement on October 26th. They'll give us an even better idea of how effective the last 6 months' worth of hikes have been. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
The war in Ukraine has played a significant role in global inflation and food security, and the issue is taking center stage at the UN General Assembly this week. World leaders are gathering for the session for the first time since the start of the pandemic. Abigail Bimman is following the session for us from New York. Abigail?
Neetu, this is the Prime Minister's first time at the General Assembly in 4 years, and things got underway with a stark warning from the Secretary-General.
Our world is in peril and paralyzed. The United Nations Charter and the ideals it represents are in jeopardy. We have a duty to act, and yet we are gridlocked in colossal global dysfunction.
Guterres is calling on rich nations to tax oil and gas companies further, using the money to help countries struggling with food and energy prices and the effects of climate change. All those topics high on the UN's agenda, especially in the context of global food insecurity made worse by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Good morning. On the sidelines of the General Assembly, the Prime Minister spoke at a global food security summit, saying Canada has stepped up food production, and this year we're on track for the third largest wheat crop in our history. As the UN faces questions about its effectiveness, Canada's Ambassador Bob Rae says its work makes a difference, with Canada playing a role finding solutions.
Unless we can continue to provide some hope that we're not doing our job. I don't think our job is to describe problems. I think our job is to try to find solutions.
Trudeau announced nearly $2 million as part of the Christchurch Call Summit to fund tech against terrorism. The Christchurch Call pushes to end extremist content online. Neetu?
Abigail Bimman in New York. Thanks, Abigail. It's a medical appointment minus the crowded waiting room. Coming up, why more people who need to see a doctor are going virtual. With healthcare systems across Canada under pressure, emergency rooms shutting down and medical services being cut off, more and more Canadians are turning to virtual care. While telehealth models are not new, they became far more widely used during the pandemic. In the last installment of our series Code Blue, Karen Lieberman explores how this technology is changing the healthcare landscape.
Chef and musician Dylan Harris is recovering after a long journey to receive the right medical care for a potentially life-threatening condition.
I would get these very short periods where if I would sneeze or cough, I would black out.
The pain led Harris to the emergency room, but with a backlog of patients and long wait times.
As weird as this is to say, being at a hospital, I was too sick to stay there, and I just couldn't wait.
Harris instead logged on to a virtual clinic.
And it ended up being totally life-saving care. It was a benign tumor encased with a sac of liquid. It was about the size of an egg.
Without access to family doctors, many patients turn to ERs, putting further strain on an already overburdened healthcare system.
The founder of Rocket Doctor, a site that virtually connects patients in need with available doctors, sees care provided online as a lifeline for Canadians, including those in rural and northern communities.
What we've done is built a system that enables licensed Canadian physicians to see patients who are in the province where they're licensed to practice medicine, completely free of charge, using your provincial health insurance to do so.
The Canadian Medical Association, the College of Family Physicians, and the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada together formed a virtual care task force, and in these two recent reports identified barriers to virtual care, like ensuring appropriate online care services are provided as part of the publicly funded health system, and calling for a framework for pan-Canadian governance so health professionals can practice more broadly across provincial borders.
We have to deal with a very complex patchwork of what you're allowed to do in different provinces, who's allowed to treat who. So there's a lot of rules which I think made a lot of sense in a different era, which maybe don't make a lot of sense right now.
Tell me a little bit more about your headache. When did it specifically start?
With the click of a button, Canadians can now also visit virtual emergency departments.
60% of our patients need no further care outside of the virtual ER, which is a pretty significant proportion of the patients we see. 40%, some of them need to see their family physician follow up, and some are sent to the ER.
Marking a shift in how healthcare is delivered and potentially easing some of the strain on the system. Karen Lieberman, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, why a young woman's death in police custody has sparked widespread outrage over Iran's laws.
You're watching Global National.
Security forces in Iran are cracking down as protests spread across the country following the death of a young woman while she was in the custody of the country's morality police. 22-year-old Mahsa Amini died on Friday after being arrested for allegedly breaking the country's strict dress codes for women. Witnesses say she was beaten. As Heather Yurex-West reports, Amini's death is once again putting the focus on the Iranian regime's treatment of women while prompting protests and condemnation around the world.
4 days after the death of Mahsa Amini, and Iran has erupted with rage. This protest in Tehran just one of many across the country. In the western city of Mahabad, Iranians faced off with police. According to a Kurdish rights group, 5 people were killed after security forces opened fire on another protest Monday. Across the country and around the world, people are angry.
Whenever I wanted to talk about this, I get emotional because this could be me, this could be my daughter, this could be my niece, my friends who live there.
But on Friday, it was Amini, arrested by the country's morality police while traveling with her family. Her crime, failing to properly cover her hair.
It's just galvanized the entire nation because of a deep, deep sorrow and fury, really, about what's been happening with girls and women in Iran for 4 decades now.
Iran's police have said Amini died of a heart attack while in custody, though her father says his daughter had no underlying health problems.
There are reports that Ms. Amini was beaten on the head with a baton, and her head was banged against the vehicle by so-called morality police.
We are calling for a full and complete investigation into the regime's actions, and we deserve explanations.
But many activists say the international community needs to do more to pressure Iran's regime.
Isolate Iran from the international community for its human rights behavior, and also don't limit the Iran issue to just the nuclear file. Unfortunately, too many Western policymakers think of Iran purely in security terms.
Perhaps subject to change now, as the world confronts the death of this 22-year-old woman. Heather Yurex-West, Global News.
Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau denounced the news of planned referendums in 4 Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine in an effort to break away and become part of Russia. The votes are expected to go Moscow's way, but in a tweet, Trudeau says, "We will never recognize them," and it's a blatant violation of international law. The referendums are set to start on Friday in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and the partly seized Zaporizhia regions. There are fears the votes could set the stage for Russian President Vladimir Putin to escalate his war as Ukraine's resistance claws back lost territory and Moscow loses ground. Here's a taste of what life was like before Russia's war in Ukraine. Today, civilians in Kyiv queued for hours to get their hands on some Western fast food. McDonald's reopened 3 restaurants in the Ukrainian capital for the first time since Russia's invasion began nearly 7 months ago. The doors were only open for delivery, but people were so excited, many raced down to collect their meals from couriers. The Commonwealth in question next. Will more countries cut ties now that the Queen is gone? Ten days of public mourning for the Queen has officially ended, and now that Charles is king, there are fresh discussions about the idea of Canada cutting ties with the monarch and becoming a republic. Elsewhere, leaders of Commonwealth countries have also raised the possibility of holding referendums to break away. Tonight, Eric Sorensen looks at the state of the Commonwealth and whether the realm could shrink under the new king.
The Prime Minister of Jamaica, Imashi.
As they lined up to offer condolences, some Commonwealth prime ministers were already contemplating a future without Charles as head of state. New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern says she expects her country will become a republic in her lifetime. And Antigua and Barbuda's leader says he expects to hold a referendum on the question in 3 years.
This is not an act of hostility, but it is the final step, as I said before, to complete that circle of independence.
God save the King! With the Queen's death, Charles is now ceremonial head of the Commonwealth of Nations, mostly former British colonies, now independent democracies.
The Commonwealth represents 2.5 billion people around the world, and it's growing.
Togo and Gabon joined this year. That brings the total to 56 members in the Commonwealth of Nations. But within that group, there are the Commonwealth realms, the UK and just 14 others, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and some smaller states in the Caribbean and the South Pacific. In these countries, Charles is the head of state, the monarch. 10 months ago, the realms lost a member when Barbados ended its status as a constitutional monarchy.
And I think that will start to domino effect. It's really, lots of Caribbean leaders of other Caribbean states have talked about becoming republics in the past.
Indeed, protests in Jamaica greeted the visit last spring of Prince William and Catherine over Britain's role in the slave trade.
We must also acknowledge the wrongs which have shaped our past.
Weeks before becoming king, Charles acknowledged the reluctance of some to see the crown as head of state.
Each member's constitutional arrangement, as republic or monarchy, is purely a matter for each member country to decide.
King, head of the Commonwealth.
Ottawa was quick to proclaim Charles as Canada's king. While many, including some Indigenous people, would end that relationship, the Prime Minister has made it clear the Crown has this government's allegiance.
That's the whole benefit of the monarchy, is it does raise you above the level of ordinary politics. The monarchy offers us that stability that we need in our system.
To have a king or not, even in countries with the closest relationships to the monarchy, it is a debate that is very much alive. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
As the world bids farewell to the Queen, our Donna Friesen reflects on the end of the Second Elizabethan era. You can read all about that at globalnews.ca/globalnational. And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is the Northern Lights in Beaver County, Alberta. We love seeing your Canada. Please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching and hope to see you again tomorrow. Have a great night.